the due debat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that humans are like very much kind of guided by myths and stories. Like, I really don't think we can do very much without them. And you learn that a lot when you have a child, because you can see the way they are like hungry for like stories or tales. It's almost like a vitamin that they need just to get through their lives, you know. And I think all of us are like that. And like, yeah, like, you know, beyond simple biological functions, why we do anything has some kind of story. Like, I have a story that, you know, that I'm going to be a great, you know, writer or something. So then I try to make that story real or something, you know. But yeah, so we have a lot of stories in our society that like aren't really functioning very well anymore. I mean,
yeah, there's the that writer Corton. What's his first name?
Oh, David Corton.
David Corton,
yeah,
has a book called Change the Story, Change the Future, where he talks specifically about this idea that we have a series of stories that we've gone through as a species, and the ones that we're living under now are kind of combinations of the distant patriarch story and the idea of sacred money and markets, and that money, if left to flow freely, will create the greatest good. And simultaneously, we have this distant patriarch who is kind of a father figure that, in many religions, is going to punish the bad and reward the good at some point.
Yeah.
And both of these stories lead to a situation where, particularly the sacred money and markets story, where we have created corporations which functionally are like the robots that they read about in science fiction, exactly. 70 years ago, in that, like robots, they're man-made. Like robots, they don't have a soul. Like robots, they cannot die, per se. And they have a purpose that's programmed into them, which is to produce more money. And there is no fail-safe to say, okay, if you're producing more money, but you're destroying an entire part of the planet that we're sharing, there's nothing in that robot to say, oh, I should stop.
Yeah, we were just talking about corporations and the fact that, like, the story that we have about them is that they're these engines of progress, and they're, you know, on their own, they're, like, you know, creating, you know, markets which are healthy, and you know, but and in a sense, they are amazing. Like, they're these incredible social tools that we've created. You talked about as robots. But if we were to think about humanity as a collective organism, maybe we could also think of corporations as, like, the primitive versions of, like, organs within the organism. Like, a media company, it's like taking in the raw data of the world and converting it into, like, bits that then lead to the organism, like, following certain pathways or something. Or energy companies, like the blood circulation system, it's pushing energy through the whole system. And then maybe we could think about, like, you know, our organs don't compete against each other, don't fight against the rest of the cells in our body, they work cooperatively. So maybe ultimately we'll redesign the underlying system in which these corporations operate so that it's, you know, based on kind of securing the collective health of the whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Which requires changing our basic framework, because the idea that competition leads to the greatest good is pretty ingrained into our culture.
Yeah.
I mean, whether that's Darwin,
there are areas that some competition is okay, you know. But it's
well, I mean, any jungle situation, these plants are competing for light in some sense, but in most cases they're not destroying the soil in order to do so.
Exactly.
And there is no natural forest on Earth that doesn't have innumerable species in the same area. There isn't, you know, this kind of decimation of anything that's not an oak in an oak area, or, you know, in a redwood forest there are still bay trees and oaks, and, you know, there is a interdependence. Yeah. Well, one of the books that's a touchstone for me is called Fup. It's about a duck named Fup. Fup duck. Get it? That is a joke in the book. But this is a very short wonderful. It's hardly even a novella. It's a kind of a long short story about the friendship between a young man and an old man and a duck. And this book, to me, captures what makes life beautiful, and in a way, it tells an ecological message, and it tells, in some ways, the messages that we're talking about local community. You have a local community in the case of this story that's just three creatures, a duck and an old man and a young man, and they're kind of learning from each other, and you can read it in 45 minutes, and it's one of the most magical things ever written.
Oh, that's cool. Like one of my favorite books, which I guess as a favorite I inherited from my mother, it's one of her favorite books, was Virginia Woolf's memoir. What's it called again? This long essay that she wrote about her childhood, and just her ability to evoke these types of experiences from childhood that are so like almost outside of language. Like her ability to sort of capture things that are really on the edge of what language can do, and kind of like pull them back in a way, so that you're suddenly like, oh wow, like I totally remember having exactly that type of experience and what that felt like. Even though my experience was so different in terms of time,
Right.
context, and so on.
I thought Proust does
That was
that
awesome
quite
too.
beautifully as well.
Yeah, totally.
And that's
Definitely.
one of the magical things about
I
reading
actually
him.
made it all the way through that.
Did you?
Remembrance of Things Past.
You did the whole.
I did the whole.
I have not done the whole thing.
It was totally worth it. It's awesome.
Yeah, I that's impressive.
Yeah.